I'll kick off by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land that we're on. So a lot of the QCC staff and our office is on the land of the Yagara and Turrbal people. And I'd particularly like to pay my respects to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander folks for their ongoing protecting and conserving of country. We know that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people have a long history of more than 65,000 years of being custodians of this land, and we benefit every day from that custodianship and that caring for country. So tonight I'm going to run through what's in the new energy roadmap that the Queensland Government released last Friday, and how that differs from the previous Queensland Energy and Jobs Plan that was the previous energy plan under the state Labor government. I'll then discuss the climate impacts of the energy roadmap and then what actions we can take together. And then, as I mentioned before, we'll have time for Q&A at the end. So please pop your questions in the chat throughout. I am notoriously bad at multitasking, so I will not see comments in the chat, but Claire's going to be collecting those questions so that we can discuss them afterwards. So just to frame our conversation, I wanted to start by making it really clear that we at QCC have a vision for the renewable energy transformation, and we want to see renewable energy projects built in the right places and not in areas of high conservation value. And so for a long time, we've been campaigning for planning reforms on a state and federal level so that we see projects be built in the right places. We also campaign to increase the uptake of small-scale solar and storage so that we're maximizing the amount of local renewable energy and sort of putting the power back into the hands of consumers, because that, it doesn't mean that we don't have to build big things, but it minimizes how much we have to build. And of course, we want to see the power put back into the hands of the people and First Nations people and regional communities really benefiting from the energy transition. There's a really important moment right now in terms of the federal government is reviewing our failing national nature laws. So that's the EPBC Act. And through that process, they're talking about doing these regional plans that outline no-go zones for development. This is something that we've supported for a really long time, and we're working right now to make sure that those regional plans and that reform is done in the best interest of nature, and that we are conserving areas of irreplaceable habitat. So I would encourage all of you to keep an eye out for our communications on that issue as well, because it's really important for making sure we get the renewable energy transformation right. It's also important to frame tonight's conversation around why we need to be transitioning our energy system at all before I get into the details about the different energy plans. So you probably have heard this in the media a lot, but across Queensland and also Australia, our coal-fired power stations are becoming older and they're increasingly unreliable. So even if you put climate change to one side, there's still a need for us to replace our retiring coal-fired power stations to keep the lights on and manage power bills. And what we've seen is for a good number of years now, the CSIRO and the engineers who run our electricity system, the Australian Energy Market Operator, has consistently found that renewable energy backed by storage is the cheapest way for us to replace retiring coal. It's also really important for us to make sure that we do the transition right and we get ahead of the game, because Australia's international trading partners have net zero commitments, and a lot of big business that operates in Australia and in Queensland also has decarbonisation objectives that they have to meet. So in order for us to make sure that, our proud history of being economic powerhouses, particularly in regional Queensland, that can continue into the future, we need to make sure that we are future-proofing our industry. And there's a really clear example of this in Gladstone, where Rio Tinto has a smelter and some refineries that are really the bedrock of Gladstone's economy. And basically, we've seen it in the media just recently, that they also have a stake in the Gladstone Power Station. They have basically said that that power station will close likely in 2029 because they're repowering with renewable energy backed by storage. And that's a commitment they're making because they have global decarbonisation objectives, but also because they've actually said publicly that coal is now too expensive. So, in terms of making sure that we have regional industries, we have good jobs for the future, we actually need to be making sure that we are looking at global trends and making sure that we're getting on the front foot and we have that cheap renewable energy coming online to support new industries. And then, of course, I know I'm familiar with a lot of you on the call and know that you're champions for climate change, so I don't have to tell you much about this one. But of course, we also are very invested in the need for replacing coal and gas because of the need to take action on climate change. We know at the moment globally we're on a trajectory for 2.7 degrees of global warming. And for anyone who read recently the Australian Government's National Climate Risk Assessment, which is a very meaty report that went through different scenarios of global warming and the impact that would have on our communities, you would know that there's really devastating outcomes that come with basically 3 degrees of warming. And so at 2 degrees, globally, we lose all tropical reefs. And at 3 degrees, we're seeing millions of Australians that are impacted by coastal erosion and extreme weather events. And we're going to see a lot of places becoming uninsurable. So it's a really stark warning, that National Climate Risk Assessment. If you want to feel depressed, please have a look if you haven't already. So the Queensland Energy and Jobs Plan was a plan that came out in 2022 from the previous Labor state government. And actually, I think many of you on this call were instrumental in campaigning for us to get that plan in the first place. So in Queensland, the state government owns the majority of coal-fired power stations, and in fact also owns the transmission network and the distribution network, so the poles and wires that move around electricity. And also the Queensland Government owns the main retailer for regional Queensland as well. So there's a lot of public ownership in Queensland, and what that means is we actually need the state government to take a really leading role in planning out the energy transition. But before 2022, the state Labor government would not commit to close coal in a time that we needed to take the best action on climate change. So it took years of campaigning from lots of folks on this call and many others to push for a plan where they finally pledged to replace Queensland's state-owned coal-fired power stations and make them renewable energy hubs. So their pledge was to close coal by 2035. And their plan for doing that involved building out a total of 25 gigawatts of large-scale renewables via renewable energy zones. So this plan was a major step in the right direction, but they were still really slowly working out the details of the renewable energy zones when they left government. So I don't want to hold up and say that the renewable energy zones were perfect, because they were still underdeveloped and lagging behind development. But that was the process set out through the Queensland Energy and Jobs Plan. And so in this graph, it shows, it's from the Queensland Energy and Jobs Plan, and it shows how they planned to ramp down coal, ramp up renewables and storage, and also have enough storage capacity so that the privately owned coal-fired power stations would be able to close as well. So the Queensland Energy and Jobs Plan, it really relied on big storage to meet its storage requirements. So there were two major pumped hydro projects that were championed by the previous Labor government. So there was Pioneer Burdekin, which actually, if built, would have been the largest pumped hydro in the world, and Borumba. The new state government, the Christopher Foley government, before they were elected, said that they wouldn't build Pioneer Burdekin. And at the moment, they're now reviewing Borumba, I think with the intention of progressing it, but the scale and scope of it is now up in the air. But just a note on the Queensland Energy and Jobs Plan is that they relied on these huge, big projects and this deep storage, but they actually modeled that you needed 7 gigawatts of deep storage. And this was a huge discrepancy from what the Australian Energy Market Operator, so again, those are the engineers who run our electricity system, what they model we need, which is 2 gigawatts of deep storage. So there was this huge overbuild, and it wasn't clear if, and it's never been clear, if that is like a necessity based on knowledge that the Queensland government had at the time, or if there were political reasons why they were keen to build such big projects. Now, one criticism we did have of the Queensland Energy and Jobs Plan was that it prioritised building very large things like those pumped hydro projects, but at the same time really underinvested in the potential of local small-scale solar and batteries and energy efficiency. So we released a report just a few months ago looking at Queensland's potential for local energy and energy efficiency and the contribution that could make to the transformation of our system. And we basically found that 60% of Queensland's electricity needs could be met via energy efficiency, or that, small scale solar and battery storage. So there's a huge potential on our rooftops of our businesses, homes, and big commercial buildings. And it's really a big role for government to make sure that that is utilised. And also, it's an important opportunity to make sure that we're delivering a transition that's fair. If we're making sure that everyone has access to solar and storage, including renters and social housing tenants, we're helping folks with the cost of living while at the same time also taking action on climate. But so that was the previous energy plan, and now we have a new state government that was elected in 2024, and they've made a number of commitments that are sort of pro-fossil fuels and anti-renewables. So this is just a quick list of some things that happened before the new Christopher government released their energy roadmap on Friday. So they committed to repeal Queensland's renewable energy targets. They did this before the election and have since followed through with that, as in they've recommitted to that. And we were expecting that those renewable energy targets will actually potentially be repealed this week. So maybe tomorrow in the sitting week. This is a little bit confusing, but on top of Queensland's renewable energy targets, we also have a 75% emission reduction target. And so this was something that the previous Labor government committed to and moved to legislate before the election as a bit of a way to test the LNP and put the pressure on them. And what actually happened was a lot of us campaigned for that 75% emission reduction target to have bipartisan support. And the Queensland LNP did vote in favour of legislating it, but they didn't vote in favour of the renewable energy targets. So there's a pretty big discrepancy there, because you do need to basically meet the renewable energy targets in order to achieve the 75% emission reduction target. We were cautiously hopeful that there was still a pathway through, that the Christopher government would maybe continue with the energy transformation and just ditch the renewable energy targets to appease their base. But things have got a little bit murkier since then. So just for some context, 75% emission reduction is higher than the new federal climate targets, and it is one of the leading state emission reduction targets as well. So it's not unambitious. The new Christopher government has also implemented unprecedented new renewable energy planning reforms. Now, these reforms are sort of nuanced because they are about community benefits. So on the surface, it's something that we really support. But the way that they're written, it's sort of unprecedented for any other industry, and also could stifle some renewable development. So we'll have to wait and see how it plays out, but it's like a good intention potentially is designed to stifle the industry. And the reason that we might think that is because at the same time, the Christopher government has axed 2 wind farms at the discretion of the Deputy Premier and Planning Minister. So that's Moonlight Range and Forest Wind. And while doing that, they've opened up 9 new gas fields for exploration, set up a resources cabinet committee to fast track the approval of new fossil fuel projects, and then also cancelled the mining objections review because it was going to come out with some recommendations that would help communities say no to fossil fuel projects. So you can see that there's sort of some favoritism towards fossil fuels and away from renewable energy. So the new energy roadmap, what is in there? So as I said, this came out just on Friday, and unfortunately, basically it scrapped the coal closure timeline of closing states' coal-fired power stations by 2035. And instead, there's basically no set closure dates for those coal-fired power stations. And so for an example, the Stanwell coal-fired power station under their plan, will now operate till 2046. And they frame it as there's a potential to increase that even further. If we're being realistic, I think it would be extremely hard pressed for them to keep a coal-fired power station open in 20 years, given their economics are so much on the side of renewable energy. But their plan has no transition plan for closing those coal-fired power stations. And essentially, this is training Queenslanders to coal-fired power stations that are increasingly unreliable. So in Queensland, our state's coal-fired power stations over the last summer period broke down 78 times, and a lot of those were unplanned breakdowns and not just maintenance. So we have a real issue with coal unreliability. So in fact, what we're anticipating is if the Queensland government is going to keep coal open for longer, taxpayers are going to have to be funding that. Our research shows that keeping just one coal-fired power station open for 1 year could cost up to $420 million. And so that's a huge amount of taxpayer money that does not guarantee that we'll have reliable power, seeing as that coal really struggles to keep up with renewable energy, particularly because we have so much solar in the middle of the day. Queenslanders love solar, and coal struggles to ramp up and down to match changing demand. In the new energy roadmap, there was also a lot of commitment to gas. So they're going to put out a tender for a new 400 megawatt gas power station in central Queensland. And that's a part of their plan to double gas generation by 2035. So we all know that gas is very polluting, but also it's super expensive. So Claire did some calculations that just over this year, gas generation has been 4 times more expensive than wind in Queensland. And we see that again in the CSIRO's modelling that gas is incredibly expensive. So in some slightly good news, there was a $400 million investment fund for new renewable energy storage and gas. This is this is a good start. It was better than nothing, but just pointing out again that our estimation of keeping coal open for 1 year, just one coal-fired power station, would cost up to $420 million. So this is less than that. And what we saw in the energy roadmap was that they increased the allocation for coal maintenance to $1.6 billion. So that's a lot of money for maintenance. So despite the roadmap being 50-something pages long, there was a lot of detail lacking in there. So there's no further details on the pumped hydro that the Christopher government is pursuing. So for context, when they scrapped Pioneer Burdekin, that big pumped hydro that Labor was pursuing, they said that they were going to invest in smaller, more manageable pumped hydro projects. And they've sort of flagged a couple. So there's Barumba, Mount Rawdon, Big T, and Capricornia. There was no additional details about these in the roadmap, just that the Queensland Investment Corporation is looking into them. There was also no plan for the state's transitioning workforce. So basically, they were just saying, oh, well, coal's not going to close now, so don't have to worry about it. There was no additional support to maximize the uptake of small-scale solar and battery storage, aside from the previously announced supercharged solar for renters scheme. So that solar for renters scheme is something that QCC campaigned for alongside our partners at Power Together. So it's something that a commitment we won before the election. It's yet to start being rolled out, but it has a $26 million commitment in the state budget. So while that's positive, just like the energy and jobs plan, the amount of that people have looked at small scale and energy efficiency is really undercooked compared to the emphasis on large scale stuff. And then there were some things in the plan that are basic continuations of what was already happening under the previous government. So some key transmission projects which were slated to move forward now are still moving ahead. So that includes Copper String and the Gladstone grid reinforcement. So Gladstone grid reinforcement will be really important for getting more renewable connection to Rio's smelter and refineries. The change we did see in the energy roadmap is that Copper String. So this is a line that basically the whole project will go from Mount Isa to Townsville. The idea is that it will lock a whole bunch of new renewable energy. The government has sort of only committed to do half of it from Townsville to Hewenden and is looking at doing the whole thing, but they've downgraded the voltage of that. So less renewable energy will be able to connect. The legislated renewable energy framework, so that's looking at these areas where you do coordinated renewable energy development. The legislative framework will move ahead, but they're being now called regional energy hubs. So as I referred to before, they were not super well defined under the previous government, and that remains the case now. It feels like work has really stalled on this. And renewable energy zones, in theory, are a really important thing for coordinating development so that we're actually managing the cumulative impacts of renewable energy projects on communities and on nature. So it's important that we get this right. And that's why it is pretty disappointing to see that there's been no movement in that space. There's also a promise in there to develop a new code of conduct for renewable energy developers. This is a sort of a little sneaky one because it actually was something that was announced by the previous Labor government. We were involved in workshops with other stakeholders around developing what that looked like. And then it kind of went nowhere post the new government. And so they've re-announced it and hopefully won't duplicate the same thing, and we'll just get on with the work that was already done. And then I've already mentioned the Solar for Renters program. So overall, what does this mean? Well, basically, it's terrible news for climate. And the one thing that came out of Friday that was a bit surprising to me was that the Christopher government, while putting out there this very coal and gas heavy plan, also said that they weren't going to amend the legislation for 75% emission reduction. So it looks like they're going to try and sit on the fence and have this pro coal plan for their base, while at the same time saying that they're still going to deliver climate action. The problem is that if you model what they've got in this energy roadmap, it does not at all deliver the emission reductions that we need to reach 75% emission reduction. So the electricity system in Queensland is our most polluting sector, and it's really important that we reduce emissions in this sector to then underpin savings and decarbonisation of other sectors. So for example, you want to be charging your electric vehicles with renewable energy and not coal-fired power. But if you model out how much emissions intensity is now going to be in our electricity system based on keeping coal open for longer, basically you find that we'll only achieve about 50% emissions reduction by 2035. So remember there that the goal that the Chrysler government promised before they were elected, and which they appear to be recommitting to, is 75% emissions reduction. So that is a really staggering difference in ambition. But so this is a lot of bad news, but there is a ray of hope in this as well, which is that I don't know how to say this politely. The plan's a bit rubbish. And so what you see when you look at this roadmap is that there's a very big underestimation about how much renewable energy is going to be built. And personally, I think that that's probably deliberate, so that the moderates in the party aren't frightening the anti-renewable MPs with the reality of the situation that we're in, because the economics are driving new renewable energy investment. And although investors have been scared off by some of the anti-renewable moves by the Chrysler government, we do see we have a really strong pipeline of projects that probably will be built over the next 5 years, based on where they're at in the pipeline. And so when you look at how many projects are probably going to be built, and then what's in the plan, you see that they've really undercooked how much renewables are probably going to come online. And I think that's intentional, probably to justify these extended coal closure dates, because if you admit that a lot of renewables are coming online, you might start to raise questions about why we need to keep coal on, and for taxpayers to pay for the benefit of keeping that coal online as well. And the roadmap also included a decision matrix for the state-owned coal assets. So if you look at it, it's saying, when we close coal, it's going to depend on the system need, the economic viability, and the asset integrity, so how reliable it is. And we are very likely to be in a position where all of those things will favour early coal closure, as we progress in time and more renewables come online. So we did see, before the energy roadmap was released, a bit of a political situation unfold, where the Treasurer and Energy Minister, who is responsible for putting out this roadmap, someone from his office leaked to the Courier Mail that there were going to be coal closure dates. And then we saw a really quick reversal of that, and numerous state government ministers and MPs come out and say, oh, no, there's not going to be any coal closure. So I think that we can likely presume that the plan probably was going to set coal closure dates. They got a lot of pushback when that was leaked in the media, and then they had to rewrite the plan to make out that coal will be around forever. I think that the economic and unreliable factors of the coal-fired power stations mean that if we're getting that renewable energy and storage coming online, it really makes no sense to keep coal online. And so some of the timeframes in this plan are very unrealistic. So where do we go from here? Well, I have met with a bunch of state MPs, a lot of them newer state MPs where this is their first time. And basically, a learning that I have is that a lot of the new MPs have a very low literacy about climate and energy. And actually engaging with them is a really useful thing to do. So I've met with a lot of state MPs that didn't even know that their government had a commitment to reduce emissions by 75% by 2035. And they were very open, the ones who would meet with us, to hear more about energy and the state of play. So it's really important, particularly I think if you live in outer suburban and regional areas, to be engaging with your state MP in a friendly manner and offering them information as a starting point to build that relationship, because there is a lot of room to increase knowledge within the Queensland Government. At the same time, we don't have to wait for the state government to act on emission reduction either, because we do have another lever to pull, which is that the federal government has their own emission reduction target, and they actually can exert pressure and put funding in to make sure that Queensland's doing its fair share to reduce emissions as well. So it's really important for us to maintain pressure on the federal government. They released their emission reduction target, which I think many of us were disappointed on. And we want to aim for them. You want to push them to implement policies so that they can meet and beat their emission reduction target. And then also, as I mentioned at the beginning of this webinar, where it's really important that we get this renewable energy transformation right. And that means it's really important for us to make sure that we get the nature reforms right and the regional planning that outlines no-go zones for development, not just for renewables, but for all type of development. So that's something that's really critical at the moment because the federal environment minister is working on that as we speak. So really critical time that if you're doing any federal engagement, it's great to talk about the need for climate action, but also, saving biodiversity is just as important in terms of climate mitigation as building renewable energy. So we can't be destroying important forests to build renewables either. So what can you do to help? Well, if you look on social media or in the Murdoch papers, you might see the conversation that a lot of the state MPs are seeing. And that is very skewed towards the minority of people that do not support the energy transformation, and their voices are incredibly loud. We see this on our social media all day, every day, because we get trolled constantly about why renewables are terrible and why climate doesn't make sense. And I think it's really important that we also, our elected representatives, are seeing the other side, are seeing that people really care about climate action and the energy transformation. And it's the responsible thing to do, not just for climate, but also for our power bills and maintaining energy reliability. So there are different ways that we can contribute to that conversation. So one of them is to help change the conversation online. So I don't have the chat up, but Jenny will share. There's a link that you could go on the Treasurer's posted today about his energy roadmap. You could jump on there and say why you're disappointed in the plan to keep coal open for longer and why that doesn't make sense. It's also great if you want to write a letter to the editor of your local paper. Just a simple 150-word letter is a great way to get your voice heard because it's often one of the most read sections of the paper. And then also we're constantly doing MP meetings with our state and federal decision makers. We've done a bunch already where we took along, local constituents. It's really great if you're either willing to join us for an MP meeting or if you're organising your own, particularly the Gold Coast, the Sunshine Coast, outer suburban Brisbane and regional Queensland. They have so many state government MPs that are fresh that would probably gain a lot from learning more about climate and energy. And so if you're interested in doing more MP meeting engagement, please feel free. I put my email in that chat message. Drop me a line. I can send you resources and invite you if we're doing any local MP meetings as well. So that is the end of the official thing. I'll stop sharing. And now we can go to questions. Over to you, Claire.
Thanks, Steph. Please put any more questions you have in the chat now. There's a question from Elise about whether we know anything more about where in central Queensland they would put the gas plant.
Oh, I'll have to take that one on notice. I don't know that off the top of my head.
Yeah, I understood that they would undertake a market sounding exercise, and so there's no detail given yet. My reading between the lines is that they're looking for um, capacity and system services within the Gladstone region. So I would say that's where it would focus, but that was not explicit in the plan.
Thanks, Claire.
Thanks, Elise. Um, and we also had a very touching exchange from two Davids answering each other's questions about um, the ownership of Gladstone's coal-fired power station. Um, and but the only other thing to say on that is that CS Energy do trade some of the excess energy from Gladstone that's not used for the smelter. So that's why they're also involved in a lot of stories about Gladstone. We had a question come in from Katie. Do you want to come off mute and ask that?
Yeah,
Katie?
can do. Um, I've heard of doing like pump hydro, I think over in the US. But I'm not really familiar with what the environmental impacts of it are. Is it kind of um like like big barriers that would impact like fish like stocks and stuff like that? And yeah, I'm unfamiliar with where they'd be wanting to put it. So if you could go into some details about that, I'd greatly appreciate it.
Yeah, no worries, Katie. Thanks for joining. So there's kind of two different pumped hydro applications. One is on river, and yes, in general, that has big environmental impacts because, like a dam, um, you're stopping some flow of water. It has a lot of methane coming out of it. Also affects a lot of the local biodiversity, and of course, the construction around that as well. There's another type of There's another type of pumped hydro which is off river. So some of the proposals are for old mine sites. And so these have a much smaller environmental impacts and something that we're much more likely to support. So John's just popped one in the chat. There's Kidston pumped hydro. So that's at the site of an old gold mine in North Queensland. It is being developed at the moment, so it's under construction. So that project, it's an existing big pit. They fill it up and basically they use it as a big battery by pumping water uphill when there's excess renewables, excess solar, and then letting it go. So those are the projects that we're much more likely to support. Mount Rawdon is also at the site of an old gold, no, some sort of mine, and so it's also promising. The other ones can have very significant environmental impacts. Claire, is there anything else you want to say on that?
Yeah, I think it, like Steph said, the building of dams and those associated environmental impacts.
Yeah, and so one good thing though is that ANU has done research showing that I think there's a heap of old mine sites in Queensland that could potentially be utilised. Now, not all of them that they looked at would be worthwhile, because pumped hydro, does cost quite a lot of money, but there are opportunities, and we should definitely be encouraging governments to look at off-river options.
Thanks, Katie. Paul, do you want to ask a question about the progress of this plan through Parliament? Are you there, Paul?
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I was just wondering, I've read in the media about QCC, expressing disappointment with the plan and all that sort of stuff. I haven't read much about, the debates in Parliament and Labour, putting a strong message out there about their feelings. So I'm just wondering about, we're a democracy. We've got a parliament, a state parliament. What sort of debates going on in there? And I'm just concerned that this discussion is in these smaller groups that are concerned about the climate, etc. What's the response? Do we have a feel for what, the man in the street in Queensland feels about this whole thing?
That's a really great question. So in terms of what Labor has come out with, to be honest, they have been their messaging is fairly aligned with ours. They've been saying that it makes no economic or emissions sense or from a reliability perspective to keep coal open for longer. So yeah, that they've been quite strong in their messaging, I would say, and also um, in terms of, I believe, holding the government to account on the emission reduction target as well. In terms of the plan, it doesn't actually have to be legislated, but off the back of some of the things that they announced, they are going to amend the renewable energy target legislation. So that legislation was put in last year by Labor. It has not just the renewable energy targets, but it has a whole bunch of other things like the renewable energy zone framework, a workers' guarantee for those that were affected by closing coal-fired power stations, and also a commitment to maintain majority public ownership of the electricity system. So that big meaty piece of legislation, they're not going to repeal it, but they're going to amend it to take out the things that they don't like. So they'll keep in the renewable energy zone stuff. They'll get rid of the renewable energy targets. The public ownership will be interesting because I think that they're going to repeal that too. Pardon me. But we haven't actually seen that amendment come up yet. It was anticipated to go this week. Parliament is only sitting again tomorrow for the week, so it might happen then. You got to keep in mind as well that in Queensland we only have one house, so things are not debated as much as they should be because they only have to go through the sitting government of the day, really. But maybe that will happen tomorrow. And then the government has committed that they wouldn't amend the emission reduction target legislation, which is a separate piece of legislation. And then the other question was, I forget, the last one was, what do punters think on the streets? Well, I think in general, whenever you do polling about Queensland's attitudes towards the renewable energy transition, there's pretty broad support in general. I think maybe potentially around 70% broad support for the energy transition in theory. I think that a lot of folks in regional Queensland, in what's very reasonable, also say that they would like the energy transition to benefit their communities and to be responsibly planned. So I think that there's a growing awareness in focus groups and in polling that Queensland's or Australia's coal-fired power stations are aging and increasingly unreliable. So that's good that that awareness is growing, but still there's a lot of misinformation floating around there. So it's a constant battle to explain to folks why we need to do this, not just for climate, but also to maintain energy reliability and power prices as well.
Yeah, no, thanks for that. I guess, if you think about it, Queensland's been hit by a whole series of flooding, in the last, year or so. And I'm just surprised that, people don't make that link, with their, experience with the floods and bad weather, to climate change and the fact that something needs to be done.
Yeah, and I think that what we see, well, particularly if there's fires, I mean, floods, people they link heat with climate change more, unfortunately, than all extreme weather. But we do definitely see that after extreme weather events, particularly fire, that concern for climate goes up. So there is definitely a correlation with people experiencing it and then caring. And so probably you can imagine that, every summer we've been hammered by extreme weather events over the last couple of years. So that trend is going to keep continuing where people are drawing the dots. And it's our job to keep helping them draw those dots as well.
Thanks, Steph. I'll throw to Helen with the question about reses.
Oh, hi. Yep, that was my question. reses. What
Do you
what's
want to
up?
ask it?
Oh,
It's
just what
less weird if you ask it.
what's happening with reses in the new plan and transmission lines? Are they being supported, that the rollout of the transmission lines and the reses?
So the rollout of renewable energy zones via the previous government was already, behind where development of renewables were at. So we're already seeing developers have all these projects proposed, in a lot of cases outside renewable energy zones, and that framework for renewable energy zones wasn't keeping pace or being implemented fast enough to actually coordinate development in the way in which they were intended. So it's always been a case of, oh, gee, we really need to hurry up and get this right and prioritize this. It seems like since the new Christopher government has come in, that work on renewable energy zones has really stalled, because we were aware that things were moving on the ground in some areas like Callide, for example. And now it seems like all that work's sort of gone a bit quiet. And so I think the first step was for them to actually evaluate if they wanted to go down the renewable energy zone path at all as a new government. And I think that they've just made that decision that they do, but still we're in the problem that we're way behind where we need to be to coordinate this development. And because the idea is, if a renewable energy zone is done well, you should be like minimizing transmission costs, but also making sure that you're looking at the cumulative impacts on the community and managing those, making sure that you're pooling community benefit funds so that there's actually legacy benefits for communities that are hosting renewables, and then also managing the cumulative environmental impacts. I mean, that's how we would like those things conceptualized. Unfortunately, in Queensland, the development of reses has never quite met the mark. And we are not seeing that change anytime soon, I think, because the process is so delayed. With transmission, they're still continuing with the most urgent transmission upgrades, but they're not doing the whole super grid that the Queensland government was doing. Claire, do you have anything you want to say on that transmission element?
Yeah, I think that like they've scaled back Copper String to be a link from Townsville to Hewenden in the first instance rather than Mount Isa, and also scaled it back from 500 kV to 330, which also means that they're not progressing, like Steph said, the super grid, which was to upgrade the transmission backbone up the coast of Queensland to 500 kV as well. But they have indicated that they will keep the parts of the legislation that allow renewable energy zones to exist, even though they will be called regional energy hubs, and will allow the government to make investments in the transmission network that they see are needed outside of the kind of traditional regulatory investment tests that they have to do. But we don't know how they will apply that yet.
This is just a follow-up, but like how do you build like wind farms and solar farms and connect them to the grid if there's not that overarching kind of transmission infrastructure being built?
Yeah, less efficiently, probably. But you know, each all the wind farms and solar farms will have to go through a connection process with Powerlink, and the architecture is still there for Powerlink to be able to coordinate that transmission. It just, yeah, is seeming less proactive than it was.
And maybe just in like a simpler sense as well, there's still some grid capacity that renewable developers can connect to in the first instance. We just need to make sure that we're building out the transmission with enough time, so that later on, when that grid reaches capacity, that there can be new projects connected.
I think that's all the questions that I can see in the chat. So, and given that we're coming up on 5 to 7, maybe we'll call it a night.
Yeah, that sounds good. Those are really good and informed questions. So thank you all for that. Really kept us on our toes at the end there. Thank you all so much for joining. If you have any follow-up questions, I did put my email in the chat, or Jenny would have posted it earlier. So feel free also to email me any follow-up questions. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it, and feel free to keep in touch.
Hey, Steph, just before you go, it's Coral speaking.
Hi, Carol.
Hey, really great. Thank you so much. And thank you, Claire, and Jen as well for your help with this. I just had a question. David Crescifulli has been really, really strong on gaining social license for renewable energy projects and putting in lots of extra planning restrictions and the like to limit them. Why is it that this energy roadmap is not open for any community comment or consultation?
Great question, Carol. And that's something that was really frustrating throughout the process as well, is that this was an extremely closed door process to get to this roadmap. They did very selective stakeholder engagement, and yeah, there was no public consultation. In the same way, in the lead up to this plan being announced, the Treasurer got the Queensland Productivity Commission to review our emissions and energy policy. And so they did that to inform this energy roadmap. And that as well had no consultation, no formal public consultation. Just, at their discretion, they talked to some people. So yeah, this was not an open process. And it was really disappointing to see that. Anything you want to add there?
Could I just add another concept? One of our thoughts was to actually write to Chrissy Babe and just say, can you please explain why the community does not get a say in our own energy future?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And yeah, so the Queensland Productivity Commission, we did a submission to that, but they didn't actually ask for it. We just gave them one. But I think, yeah, Coral, I think that's a great idea. The Queensland Energy and Jobs Plan, which again I think many of you were involved in helping to push for. My recollection is they did a big consultation, and then before as well. So it is disappointing that there wasn't the same scrutiny, especially in the consideration that this is probably like the biggest economic reform that this government will do, and they're really treating it as an afterthought.
Hey, Steph, it's Fergus here. I typed a message in, it probably didn't go at the right place. Does QCC consult with the National Farmers Federation? Because I was rather intrigued, listened to an interview from the CEO on ABC earlier this week, and she seemed quite relaxed about the roadmap, which surprised me given the expansion of gas is a key part of the plan and the impacts that it has on good quality agricultural land, for example. And she didn't raise that at all as a concern. And then, of course, the land clearing and the impact that has on emissions reduction. Losses, Queensland, as we all know, is leading the country in that regard. So, yeah, do you have engagement with the National Farmers Federation, and what kind of messaging are you getting back from them?
So we definitely get engagement we engage with the Queensland Farmers Federation. I'm actually not sure about the national one.
Yeah, it probably was the Queensland, Farmers Federation.
Yeah, so we engage with them regularly on a bunch of our different campaigns. There's a lot of people that we communicate with that did come out after the plan and sort of had a fairly positive reaction to that. So not just them, other groups. And I think that you've got to realize that a lot of them, they don't want to lose their access to this government, and they want to celebrate any small win that there is. And so there is like, people are trying to play nice as stakeholders as well to manage their relationships. So every group has a different, I guess, way of appraising how they respond to things, and maybe what they say to us can be a little bit different to how they publicly respond. In terms of, yeah, I think that we worked with the Queensland Farmers Federation on the Great Artesian Basin. They were going to do that. What do they call that, Claire? Help me
The
out.
carbon capture and storage.
Yes, in defeating that proposal, which was, a lot of farmers were very concerned about, and we were also concerned about as well, because it was just a scapegoat for fossil fuels. So we have worked with them. We hopefully will continue to do so, but I think various groups have limits on what they're willing to say. Claire, is there any other reflections you have?
Yeah, and I think just to put in perspective, the gas expansion in this proposal, like this energy roadmap, is a lot lower than the kind of overall gas expansion agenda of the Queensland Government for export, which is pretty high. And so, yeah, I think for like the political reasons that Steph's outlined, and that this is kind of more of the same. And there's a lot of work that we are doing with, our colleagues at Lock the Gate and other organizations to try and support those farmers who are trying to push back against the gas expansion agenda and more broadly.
Thanks.
Okay, thanks so much, everybody. Now we're really at time, and I'm sorry for missing a couple of questions, but thanks heaps for jumping in and for coming on tonight. And yeah, please go forth and contact your MPs and local papers and keep up the great work. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.